My name is Naomi, and I am an introvert. And I understand very well the challenges that my fellow introverts experience in dealing with the world and getting out there in the world and doing what we have to do in the world in order to get through the day and have a good life. I certainly know firsthand what the challenges are of dealing with our fellow extroverts. Some of whom are wonderful, and they're the best friends we have, and some of whom never stop talking, and they drive us crazy. And you know the sorts of people I'm talking about. I also, however, have great empathy for extroverts, because extroverts as well have challenges by virtue of their extroversion. I've talked with many, I've interviewed many, and I know that even though we introverts seem to face some extraordinary challenges, so do they. And one of their challenges is figuring out how to get along with us mystifying introverts. Much of what I will be talking about today is addressed in my ebook, How to Survive, Excel, and Advance as an Introvert. This ebook also goes into additional information. So if it's of interest, take a look at the link. Also take a look, because I do have at the end of this page a number of articles that I have written on the subject of introversion and extroversion that also supplement what I'll be talking about, as well as adding some additional information that we won't get to, and include some comments from other people who have read some of my articles. And I want to let you know right now that the secret to surviving, excelling, and advancing as an introvert are as follows. Number one, let it be okay to be who you are. You are just fine as an introvert. You don't need to change who you are. Secondly, be willing to defend who you are and say what you need. If we as introverts let the extroverts run all over us, then we have no one to blame but ourselves. And third, be willing to stretch, to try new behaviors, to be a little more extroverted, to meet our fellow extroverts halfway so that they meet us the other halfway. And by the way, although I am quite sure that the majority of you attending are introverts, I certainly hope that some of you are extroverts, have more extroverted behavior than some of us, because you may pick up a few useful pointers on how to get along better and work more effectively with those strange folks. There's a comment that I enjoy, and it's one I've heard often from people who've said to me, you can't possibly be an introvert. Now, why would they say that? Well, one reason is, as a professional speaker, I have spent a lot of time in front of audiences, anywhere from 100 to 1,000 to a few thousand, giving a presentation, and I can do it, and I love doing it. And they have perhaps seen me engaged in lively conversation with other people, and from these things they have surmised that I must be an extrovert. I couldn't possibly be an introvert. Well, it sort of tickles me to have people think that I'm an extrovert. It means that I've learned how to do some things that people associate with extroverts. But of course, what they haven't seen is that before I give a presentation, I do a lot of planning and preparation and practice. And that's one thing that we introverts are good at doing, of getting things in place so that when we communicate, we are quite articulate in doing so, and that is one of our particular strengths. And of course, what they also may not see and may not know is that after I give a presentation or spend 3 or 4 days in a seminar with a client, I go back to my cave and I crash. I really do think of it as my cave. I don't interact with anybody else. I need a lot of quiet time. So, it shows me that I've learned a few things about being seen as more extroverted, but it doesn't mean that I'm an extrovert. But still, the fact that some people think that I can't possibly be an introvert, why this topic? Well, this topic came about as one of interest for me. Many years ago, I was doing a multi-day seminar, and a woman in the class asked me if we could spend a little bit of private time together. And so we scheduled breakfast the next morning. I assumed that what she wanted to talk about was how she had performed in some of the team activities that day. And so in my mind, I went through those sorts of things so that I'd be prepared to respond. We got together for breakfast, and she asked me, how did you manage to be successful as a manager, given that you're an introvert? And I was totally taken by surprise. I had not expected her to ask me about that. I had never thought about that. And I hemmed and hawed and muttered and sputtered. And and finally said, I just have to think about it and get back to you because I don't have an answer for you at my fingertips. I was fairly successful as a manager, but I didn't have an answer for why that had happened. Now, there was a real lesson in that for me, and that is that when I am prepared to know what someone will expect me to talk about, I can deliver and be articulate in doing so. And normally when people have said, could we get together one-on-one, I ask them what they'd like to talk about, and so then I can prepare. This time I made an assumption, I was wrong, and it was a real lesson. But I think there's a lesson there for all of us as introverts. To the extent we can be prepared ahead of time to communicate, we can be much more outgoing and forthcoming, and perhaps be seen, if not as extroverts, at least as somewhat more participative introverts. Well, this was the first situation that led me to really think about what is being an introvert all about. But it wasn't the last. In another situation, also when I was doing a seminar, during a break, one of the fellows said to me privately, no one else was around, he said, I can't seem to put it out there, to verbalize the way some of the other people in the group can. Is there something wrong with me? And that really tugs at me when I hear someone say that, and that was the first time I'd heard it, but it's far from the last. So many people as introverts wonder, is there something wrong with me? And the answer is no, there is nothing wrong with you, at least not about your introversion. But I can understand where people might feel that because of the things that make us an introvert, as I'll be talking about shortly, that make it a little harder for us to kind of put it out there. Similarly, and sort of related, was another woman who said to me, I had trouble speaking in groups, and I'd been with her team, and she was very forthcoming. And they said, well, I don't get it because I've seen you speak up among your coworkers all the time. And she said, yeah, I'm fine with people I know. It's with people I don't know. It's with our customers where I have trouble speaking up in groups. So there's something where a skill can be learned, can be developed that would make her a little more comfortable speaking up in groups. And finally, this fellow who I'd met and had some conversations with, and he said, I don't know if I ought to become a manager because I'm an introvert. And he said, you definitely don't want to let that reason be a reason not to move forward in your career if being a manager is something you aspire to. Well, these are some things that led me to think about the topic and to reflect on the question, is introversion an impediment? Well, it's certainly a challenge. And I certainly don't want to make the case that, we shouldn't have the problems and the challenges and the frustrations that we do because they're very real. And so I do think in some ways introversion can be an impediment if we let it be. But an I'm an introvert, woe is me attitude is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you let yourself hold yourself back because you're an introvert, well, then you won't accomplish the things that you otherwise might, and you've proven yourself correct. So, what we want to talk about then is what it takes to survive, excel, and advance. And this is sort of an agenda slide. What we want to do here is think about and understand the differences between introverts and extroverts, or at least introverted behavior and extroverted behavior, but also the difference among introverts, because we're not all one of a kind. Secondly, to recognize how introverts are perceived by the extroverts in our midst. And third, to recognize your options and take action based on an understanding of the differences and an awareness of how introverts and perhaps you are perceived. So basically it's these three things: differences, perceptions, and actions are what we'll be looking at. And as we proceed and look particularly at what introversion is all about and how it contrasts with extroversion, you'll hear me use certain language such